Off the ball. This is News Talk.
All right, RTE sports reporter Damian Lawlor is alongside me in studio. He has just released a new book, After the Storm, the GAA, COVID and the Power of People, on sale in all good bookshops right now. Nice to have you in the studio, Damian. How are you keeping?
Nathan, it's good to see you. Things are going well. Busy.
Good. The inspiration for a book like this, where did it come from?
So, I suppose COVID started and I ended up covering a lot of the stories around the GAA ceasing and the GAA getting back to play and all that happened in between. And, you know, at the start, I felt under a fair bit of pressure. I just felt that there was an itch maybe to get back playing, and people thought we'd get back 3 or 4 weeks. That didn't happen, and as life went on, I got the distinct impression that people were suffering, people really missed it, and all my kind of stories were administration, governance, the financial hit, return to play, when that happened. You were hanging on the government press briefings. But slowly, Nathan, the personal stories, the human interest stories came in, and I kind of got a good bank of them built up. And I mentioned to a few people that I've been storing away stuff and thinking about doing a book on how the GAA was coping with COVID. And after maybe a few months' time, I spoke to Paul Rouse, I spoke to the publisher. Both of them said, nah, people are sick of COVID at this stage. We're weary of it. No way. But they asked me what I had in mind, and I listed out a few ideas, and I said, that's different. There could be a market for that. So I kept ploughing ahead, Nathan. 2 years later, here we are. And I suppose if I could summarise it, the power of people is on the subhead there. It's really all about people. It's peppered in between are the government and the GAA's attempts to get us back on track, but it's all about people. All the different battles that people had to get through COVID.
It is a vast landscape, the GAA, and you cover it all in this book, from people who were suffering with severe illness, who were so restricted in their movements during COVID. And you know, it is, even though it's so recent, it's still difficult to read back and imagine that is what we have lived through over the last few years. You do cover the top of the GAA as well, and the GAA was in so much focus because the love of sport and people wanted to get back, and it was a real sign of normality that when the GAA started to return, whether it was just for kids games or eventually starting to open up Croke Park again. The coverage of that and the pressure people the likes of John Horan were under, I remember the time when there was talk that they might lose their government funding because of teams going back training. Remind us of that, and from the conversations you've had with people, just how intense the scrutiny was on Croke Park headquarters.
Yeah, and I asked them, were they under pressure? And Fergal McGill and John Horan were two of the leading characters that got the GAA through COVID, and they both kind of rebuked the word pressure, but they had to have been under it. I mean, you were 15 weeks out from Christmas 2020, Nathan, and you had the word there that there would be a championship of some form, but yet there was no guarantee of anything. And John Horan was in a central council meeting on a Saturday morning. His phone rang around 10:30, and it was Jack Chambers, and he knew that the answer to a championship or no championship lay with that phone call. So Jack Chambers said that he had got a personal commitment from Minister Michael McGrath that the money was forthcoming, and it was coming to plough ahead with the championship. Behind it all, Micheál Martin really wanted a championship, the Taoiseach, and I suppose he's got huge GAA links. He felt it would give people a lift in dark times, and he was right. But it was only 15 weeks out that they got the actual green light to go ahead. They were losing money everywhere. I mean, people say, how could the GAA be struggling for money? They had made 70 million the previous year. 87 to 93% of that money goes straight back to clubs, Nathan, and it goes back quickly. They've projects. You drive anywhere in Ireland, look at any GAA premises, floodlights, ball walls, new pitches being laid. That money goes right back there. So they were cash poor, and gate receipts were gone, club lottos were gone. And effectively that's how close it came to a championship not being played in 2020, and that would have been a landmark moment for the GAA. Only once in their history had a championship not been completed.
We spent that time waiting for people to slip up, it feels like, and I was as guilty as anybody. I remember sitting in here at the morning, the story was on the front of the Irish Independent that the Dubs were out training, and there's other examples of Mayo sneaking backroom staff, unaccredited staff into the All-Ireland final. Did we just totally lose the run of ourselves with that? Or when you think back and you were talking to people at the time, just how serious an incident was, say particularly the Dublin footballers, who I know they feel quite aggrieved that they've been singled out, as you point out in this. There were many breaches.
Yeah, there were,
internally in the GAA, how seriously was that taken?
They were furious. I'll go forward a little bit. When the club championship celebration spilled over and you saw that viral video of one part of the town meeting the other part of the town in a street in Southside Cork, and the meeting in the middle. John Horan rung Micheál Martin the next day and said, we're pulling the whole thing. We're pulling all the championships. I think 11 championships had to be completed around the country.
Right.
We're pulling everything. Micheál was there. Nemo Rangers were due to play the county final on Sunday, and Micheál Sun and goals, and he was there. Do you have to kind of pull everything? But they pulled it. They made that decision. Reverse back up then a little bit, and to what you first mentioned, the high profile training breaches. You had Down, you had Cork, you had Monaghan, and you had Dublin. Dublin were on the front page of the national newspapers. The Independent got it slap bang in the middle, and the GAA were really furious over that. And I think now, Nathan, if you talk to maybe some of the players, would they put themselves forward to train in that environment knowing what happened? I don't think they would. I think when you think of COVID and how it played out, what difference did it make if a team trained? Like, I mean, it wasn't going to bring them on. It was ridiculous to think that people were going out. GAA teams were trying to do their best. They were training in social distance fashion. They were training in public places, not GAA grounds. But really and truly, did they need to do that? It went down like a lead balloon with the GAA, put them under enormous pressure. I don't believe it ever really was a risk of costing them funding, but they got their knuckles rapped by the GAA or by the government on a couple of occasions, and it was bad PR at a time when 90% of the association was doing great work to try and offset the threat of COVID. Don't forget the questionnaires, Nathan. You would have filled them out for your own kids. 13 million of those were filled out. And the GAA are sure that they helped keep the spread of COVID down as well, because it reminded you every single time you were going out to take precautions. Then you had 4 high-profile breaches, and you had club championship celebrations, and that did ruin it for quite a few people.
That's remarkable that it was John Horan who made the initial call to Micheál Martin, obviously knowing the potential consequences and fallout as the footage started to emerge.
Yeah, he rung on October morning, and he just said, "It's gone. We can't." The GAA could control everything that happened within their own premises, but once the cup left or went to a local pub, the GAA were powerless to do that. And it just so happened then that a lot of clubs hadn't won titles in about 60 years. A perfect storm arrived, so they all kind of arrived at one time. But Micheál Martin was kind of saying to John Horan, are you sure? Like, you don't have to go to these lengths. You are going to great lengths elsewhere. Horan was having none of it. He pulled the plug straight away. He was a serious leader in all of this. I have a chapter there, the pandemic presidency. I think he started off his presidency trying to get integration a bit closer and maybe 1 or 2 tweaks in the calendar, and he ended up in the middle of a pandemic just trying to keep the association alive.
The book isn't a inside the corridors of power during COVID type book. That's certainly a part of it and has to be covered. It is more a story of people and the way the GAA community came together. You talk about David Brady there and like the brilliant initiative he started. Yeah,
and like Brady was talking me through his time making phone calls to elderly and vulnerable and isolated people, and a phone call would start off with, "You're the first person I spoke to in a week." And Brady would have got David, David, Nathan, and like he's a very, very he's a brilliant fella. But like he got very emotional. But by the end of his exercise, he probably gave about 1.5 years ringing people. And by the end of his time, people were coming out of the closet, declaring their sexuality to him. They were telling him their deepest fears. I think one man had buried his partner, and his own kids were cocooning to protect him. And David rung him at a particularly vulnerable moment. He struck up great friendships then with others. It all started with a guy whose son is a journalist. He was a farm and sheep in Wicklow, and David rung him, and he was looking after his neighbour's sheep, which David thought straight away, this is an act of a good guy. And your man thought it was a bit of a skit, but he said, "No, I'm here, David Brady. Your son said you might need a chat. Do you want to talk about Mayo football?" And they chatted away.
Right.
And it's just small little acts of kindness like that in that chapter. But there's so many great yarns that David tells as well, Nathan, and I just thought it was important to bring that in with fresh stuff as well.
Yeah, the fella down in Kilshamagh who seemed to know his date of birth somehow.
Knew his date of birth when David rung, and he had heard him on Midwest Radio a few years previously. And then David spoke to a guy whose minor team had checked in on him 20 years later to see if he was okay during COVID. And he just said, "How these guys even thought of me. You know, it's just the community looking out for each other.
Yeah, I love David Brady, obviously, and when you read back as to what he did, like, it is a remarkable thing that made such a difference to so many people. And the time he put into it himself, he was making over 20-25 calls a day to people,
yeah,
and then spending more time calling people he knew to get them to make calls as well.
He had a little army behind him as well, and like, he would get the odd bit of abuse as well, like for being a Mayo footballer. And remember what you guys did to poor old Pillar Caffrey's dubs in the Hill.
Oh yeah, I like to remind Mossy Quinn of it all the time.
Yeah, taking over the Hill, and he got flack for that. I think one guy he rung just hadn't met anybody. He was living maybe 3 or 4 miles away from the nearest house, and even then he didn't know the people in the house. He knew their ancestors, their generation, but he was telling David that they didn't know this chap either, but they arrived with groceries and left them on his door and just said, we're only over the road if you want us, left their phone numbers and stuff like that. And I think you had shopping being delivered to the elderly, you had the community coming out looking after each other. And I think maybe in parts of Ireland you take that for granted, because the GAA is just maybe a meeting point for people. It's also the walkways, getting the walkways open so people could walk around. You think back at the trivial stuff like that, people just wanted the club gates open to go down and have a few kicks or a few pucks, but nothing like that wasn't allowed. GAA they took a zero tolerance policy. They cracked down on closing everything, and they got the trust of the government, and they earned that, and then they gradually, slowly opened up the return to play, and then really have all the people's stories in between that.
Yeah, can you tell us about some of them? Because the clubs, the support that local clubs give, particularly I think to their elderly communities, of properly checking in, as you say, making sure that if they couldn't go to the shops, that somebody would step up. So
go to New York first of all. You had a heap of undocumented Irish over there that probably people still don't even think about, and a lot of those were working in the hospitality and service industries, and they lost all their jobs. The GAA community, led by Joan Henchy over there, she's a New York GAA president, they rallied around together to become part of a movement called Sláinte, and they literally fed families and kept families from going under. They paid their rent, they looked after their kids. A lot, Joan would, I suppose, come across people with mental health illnesses, so they would have looked after all that aspect. Back in Ireland then, I'll give you an example of an Antrim hurler, Donal Nugent. Donal had gone through his own battle before COVID even started. He was dealing with addiction. He was in Cúnmhara. He had gone to a dark place in his life, maybe lost a lot of money, probably gambling and drink. He transferred from his home club, ended up playing against his brother in the county final, had an altercation with his brother. He's in a dark place, got admitted then, got help from the GPA. So when he came out, you're told to surround yourself with good people you can trust. A pandemic struck. He had to cocoon. He was isolated. And I think the worst thing an addict can have, so the experts say, is spare time and time to think. And essentially, his story, how he got through the whole lot, from the Antrim hurling manager coming down and throwing him the keys of the car after a game so he wouldn't get sucked back into temptation, he'd go off and get a coffee or whatever, to his teammates checking in on him. This guy went from being homeless to basically finding his life again, through the help of the GPA, the counselling service, and through the GAA community as well. Incredible story. To flip that then, Lochmore, Castellini, they played like 2 years, 19 games in 19 weeks. COVID nearly brought all their best players back, as it did with the Tipperary footballers, and they ended up winning back-to-back county titles, dual county titles in hurling and football. Tipperary won a Munster title out of the blue because all their best players, Colin O'Riordan, all these guys were back in Ireland at the same time. They were supposed to be travelling. Colin was down in the AFL as well. Yeah. So COVID did mad things, and I think if you just look around the country, there was a camogie player called Marianne Walsh, Nathan. She was a nurse in a hospital in Waterford. She was diagnosed with a cancer in the middle of this as well. And what kept Marianne going during her treatment was the prospect of playing with her club and winning a camogie championship down in Kilkenny. And 5 months after being diagnosed, she won that championship and she got Player of the Year in Kilkenny.
Wow.
Her teammates arrived up in the door. They weren't allowed to go in with restrictions, but they dropped off presents for her the night before her chemotherapy. So all these stories happened in a dark period of our lives, but they're all stories of resilience, how people got back again, and the power of people, I guess.
You do look at that inter-county season as well during 2020 when, as you say, mad things happens. Cavan won, Tipperary won. You would have assumed that Mayo would have won it that year as well behind closed doors, but
he was sticking out for
pandemic,
it. I suppose the Tyrone setup as well. We keep forgetting that the whole championship nearly was skewed because of the Tyrone COVID situation, and I document with the Tyrone camp how they got through it. Then maybe a near neighbour of yours, Neil Ewing for Sligo. Neil's career ended on a whim because after 13-14 years playing for his county, Sligo had to withdraw because of COVID cases, and he never got a chance to have a last season or a farewell. So there's a contrast there as well.
And even in those good stories of Tip and Cavan, like, while they were brilliant to end their long waits, there just wasn't enough people there to see it. There wasn't enough people able to celebrate it. It
was the weirdest thing ever. I was lucky enough to be down there in Páirc Uí Chaoimh the day Tip won, and I'd been like underage Tip setups, under 17, under 20 over the years, so I'd know the work that would have gone into it. It was so weird. There was nobody at home in Thurles. Clonmel was like a ghost town. The Tipperary football support is low enough anyway. They nearly know all their supporters by name, but the players would have loved to have met those people on the field afterwards. When you think back about it now, like, you wouldn't even allow 500 people at the time. It was just a blanket of darkness. So it was the weirdest time ever. I'll never forget it. And did it take away the goodness? It probably did a little bit, because Tip football deserved this moment in the sun, no more than Mayo football as well.
What might have been, What might have been. You said when you first went to the publishers and you spoke to somebody like Paul Rouse, it's such recent history. Do people want to dredge it all up again? Did you find this an enjoyable book to write? Did you find hearing these stories really worthwhile?
Yeah, I did. There was a chapter on the Meath ladies footballers, and look at the journey they've gone on. They've been able to go on that partly because COVID brought them all home as well and gave them a chance to become the best conditioned team in ladies football. Like, they were able to give time after time after time in the gym, training together. They became closer as a team together because they were all at home as well. And I went out to meet Eamon Murray to interview Eamon for the book. It was just a pleasure to learn their stories as well, and to hear what was coming in. Did I enjoy it? I suppose you never enjoy writing a book, Nathan, and then when it comes out, then you're worried how it'll go down. So I was stressed enough writing it, but when you look back at the pictures, maybe the picture section has reassured me that things will be okay with this book, because it just gives you a fairly snapshot, a fairly good insight into what we went through. So it's still quite recent, but we've forgotten an awful lot of it. I mean, what we take for granted now. People were texting me, will we be able to wear gum shields? Will we be able to shake hands? Will we bring our own water bottles? Can 50 people get into the ground, or maybe 100? That's only like a year ago. We moved on pretty quickly,
Yeah, I remember standing in Croke Park the day of the All-Ireland final alongside David Brady, watching Mayo against Dublin, and wondering, is this real? Is this what you want an All-Ireland final to be?
And I was down pitch side as a reporter, and Johnny Cooper was taken off for the last 12 minutes, and Johnny was in front of me guiding the team home from the sideline alongside Desi, obviously, but you could hear every word the players were saying to each other, and from that point of view, it was behind Rory Gallagher when Rory was managing Derry against Donegal, and the game went on for about 77 minutes, and how the man had a voice afterwards, I don't know, because he coached every single play and tactic. But it was fascinating from a reporter's point of view, because you could actually hear everything. Usually, you know yourself, you're battling crowds, but I could, Rory never relented once. I'd say single-handedly, Christy McCaig made a run up to the halfway line at one stage. It was an off-the-ball run, and Rory led a roaring to get back and look after his man. And you're kind of thinking to yourself, Jesus, is he allowed to express himself here at all? But Rory justified it. They won a provincial title the year after,
It does really hammer home what rural Ireland loses with its young people having to, either just move to the big cities or to emigrate. When you look at the impact that having all those people back living in their hometowns again, back working from home, back being able to play for their local club, to commit properly to the county, it's incredible how quickly it's turned again and they're all gone again.
Yeah, it was a snapshot in time, and people are finding it very hard to get accommodation in urban areas. They're finding it hard to afford accommodation, but not everybody wants hybrid working either, Nathan. A lot of people want you in the office again. So they were home for about maybe 18 months. Some people did settle. I know back in Nina, where I'm from, a lot of people came back and stayed there, but a lot of people left again. And I think even with Lockmore, they're out of the hurling now. They've lost a lot of their team through injury and travel. So I think a lot of young guys and young girls as well playing said, hang on, there's more to my life than just being a GAA player. And a lot of them went off travelling. A lot of maybe are retiring 28, 29. They're not going on the way they did either.
Have you got a sense of that? Because I did wonder. I remember myself, out coaching underage teams, and like we're all sort of busy with, every night of the week there's something on.
Yeah,
you
there
kind
is.
of took a step back and said, never going to get back into that cycle again. We'll cut back on what the kids are doing, give them a bit more spare time, give everyone a bit more spare time. And this week is exactly as it was back in 2019. Did the GAA lose anything after COVID in terms of the volunteer side of things? Was there a cohort of people who just didn't come back, who did find something else in their life?
I think a lot of people came back and were itching to come back, and I think you're right. I think we're back in that little bubble again. Like, I mean, I know myself when COVID hit, I was wondering what to do, because apart from being a journalist, my whole life is tied up with GAA. It's actually very sad. The only outlet I have in my life is GAA, and I said to myself, I'm going to use this time to catch myself on. But I was driving back to Tipperary helping out a minor team, my club, Killer One, and now I'm with the NACE underage setup, and it's not as much travel, but you're still out 5-6 nights a week. So you have a cashless society at GAA games now. You can't pay for a ticket anymore in cash. That's changed. But I think the coaches nearly are coming back. Look at the way referees are being treated too, Nathan. Like, I mean, we haven't got an appreciation really for match officials and what they're putting into it. So has it changed? We have a split season. That'll be tweaked. It'll go back another 2 weeks, I'd say, in over 2 years, and then you'll have intercounty coming into the start of August, maybe chance for break, and then club will take it home from there. So you have a split season. You have a lot of people still working from home, a lot of GAA officials still maybe doing a hybrid situation. You've got Garth Brooks filling out Croke Park. You've got 82,000 people at All-Ireland finals. All that is back.
So financially, have the GAA recovered?
I'd say it'll be another few years yet. But I think the concerts and all that will help. And I think that none of the sponsors withdrew either. They all stayed with it. And I feel the next step now will be integration process. It probably has helped kickstart the integration process. The four bodies had to act as one with all of this. You couldn't have Camogie Association doing things differently. So for the first time ever, all Gaelic games ceased under the one umbrella of a joint four group, and I'd say that has kick-started the road to integration. The fact that Mary McAleese is involved, I'd say now it'll be a definite time frame on it. This won't be allowed just meander down through the years. I give it a few years and we'll be one body, I'd imagine. That's something that COVID started too.
Damian, pleasure to have you in studio. The book, The GAA, COVID and the Power of People After the Storm, from Damian Lawlor. It's out now. Get it for the Christmas. You can reflect on the bad times of the recent past as we hopefully look forward to some decent times. Damian, thanks a lot.
Great talking to you, Nathan. Thanks a million.
Off the Ball on News Talk.